Hi, guys. Welcome to tonight's live chat. It's so good to see you. I see you guys already signed in. Some of you are already ready to go. It's so good to see you. I am late, I think by 10 minutes. It's been a really busy day, draining, tiring, but I'm really glad to see you guys. And hopefully we can have a pretty interesting and good conversation tonight. I actually have the manual, okay, out that I am not a big fan of. I'll show you briefly. It is the DSM. Have you guys ever seen a hard copy of this? You know, psychology literally calls it the Bible of mental health and disorders, you know? And this is far from a Bible, let me tell you. It's far from a Bible. It is a work of art, okay? I will give it that. It also helps us understand what's going on in our lives, in our heart, in our mind, right? It also is some pretty interesting research that is found in this manual. A lot of really smart people who have seen things, they have gotten together in what we call a work group, and they spent at least 4 years trying to put together a diagnostic manual that has had over a bazillion revisions. So this is a flawed book, okay? But we're going to use it tonight. So I had it out because we're going to talk about a diagnosis that I'm not going to give anything away just yet, because I want us to have a conversation first. And I want to get what your thinking is about this kind of explosive, habitual rage. So before I give it a diagnostic label, I'm trying to find the page so that I can go to it. But there's definitely a diagnostic label to the kind of anger that we're going to be talking about in tonight's live chat. So let me highlight that really quickly. Even as a clinician with 16 years of experience, I still look at the DSM with 5 eyes. I'm like, wait a minute, does that say, how do you pronounce that? Is this right? Is that the right page? All right, give me 1 minute. I'm going to look this up. What the heck page was it? Okay, so we will look over this together because I think it's going to be helpful for you to be able to identify what exactly this is. Now, let me give you just a little bit of background here here we go. I found it. Let me give you just a little bit of background and information on why this is an important kind of a conversation. And I hope that you guys will be able to relate to this. I've always dealt with, as a clinician, I've always dealt with people who were very angry, puzzling, filled with rage. They would engage in behaviors that most of society would perceive as antisocial. So there was a lot of isolation. There was a lot of withdrawal, a lot of anger outbursts, rage. You guys know, those of you who have been with me for many years on this channel, that my work in understanding behavior and personality disorders started working in a juvenile, delinquency center and working on a juvenile residential facility where those kids were arrested. They were serving life sentences. They were serving murder convictions. They were serving, convictions for transporting and selling drugs into the country. So these were some really dangerous kids. And of course, I've walked the floors of jail cells. So I've been able to, in my past, really understand what is going on in the mind of a person who is just full of rage, right? And what is going on in the heart and in the soul of a person who just lashes out in anger, where it terrifies the people that are close to them. What is it that happens? There's this kind of look that I have identified in the face of a person who is filled with rage. And working in these legal areas of my field gave me that up close experience. It's a look of blankness that's on the face. There's a look of loss of control. There's a look of pure hatred, and that is scary, right? Especially when you look at the person full of rage and anger, and that's your mother, that's your angry father, that's your brother, your sister, your husband, your partner. It's really hard to look at them when they're in that mode. And it's almost like their perception of reality, it narrows, it narrows onto that target that they are angry with. And by the grace of God, I've never had that experience as the recipient of somebody's rage in my role as a therapist. Thankfully, I have always been able to play the role of let's build a relationship and talk. And that has helped me. But when I was working in a residential treatment facility where kids were serving time, the staff, who were, I think, way more brave than me, because they had to feed the kids and clothe the kids and get them ready for school and get them ready to go downstairs and eat lunch, breakfast and dinner. They were giving them activities to do all throughout the day and giving them, educational seminars throughout the day. So the staff on the unit was there with these kids all the time. I was there so many hours a day to provide psychotherapy. What I have been able in my past in this career to recognize or observe is the staff member was always that person where that child, that adolescent, that young adult, their vision or their view would narrow to that staff member. And I remember doing therapy in a room of a young man. He was 18 and he was serving time for murder. And sadly, he not only murdered his father, but he murdered his 7-year-old brother as well. What he did is he set the house on fire, and he left out of the house and let it burn down. He stood there and watched it. They had Ring cameras. So mom told me he stood there and watched the house burn, and he waited until the flames looked like they went to the room where his dad and his brother were sleeping. And then he turned himself on and began to run and scream and cry and say, our house is on fire, to make it look like he was very much a victim and he had to hurry up and get out, but his family's in there. Okay. So he was a very dark, dark soul, but he was serving time for murder. So I'm doing therapy with this young man, and he got upset with a staff member because he yelled at me. And I asked him, I said, you knew exactly what you were doing, didn't you? And he says, no, I didn't. I says, I think you did. You're not a stupid kid. You set the house on fire and you walked out of that house to paint yourself as a victim. Did you not? And so he says to me, yes, okay, yes. And he's screaming at me. And so staff member, who was a male staff member, he came bursting through the door. He's like, why are you yelling at her? And he says, I'm just mad because Miss Tamara knows me, and so we all laughed. But then he changed, and his rage turned on and his anger came on, and his narrowed view was to that staff member. And I couldn't talk to him. I couldn't reach him. I couldn't stop him. I couldn't get him to answer me calling his name. He just ran and lunged on the staff member, and they were rolling around on the floor. And that, I think, was my first place of understanding in my career: anger, rage, and intermittent explosivity. Intermittent explosive disorder is what we're kind of going to talk about, because I think you guys can relate to this. Think about that mom slamming things, gossiping, spreading rumors, being manipulative, being sneaky, talking about you behind your back, minimizing you and blowing herself up, right? Telling everybody else what a pain in the neck you are, for lack of a clinical term, starting chaos, triangulating, treating everybody meanly, coldly, and cruelly, having these callous, cold personality traits. All of that can be the foundation by which explosivity or rage comes out of. And it is terrifying when it happens. Also think about that father who has very little to no self-control. He's impulsive. He is miserable. He engages in road rage. He takes advantage of situations, and when he doesn't get his way, he flips out. It's this whole heap of chaos that comes with intermittent rage and anger, violent anger that can really traumatize you. There are some research studies for those of you who feel like you may have a complex PTSD. There are some research studies that suggest that if you are in a family or in a relationship with somebody who has intermittent explosive disorder, or somebody that has this intense violent rage that is habitual, meaning that it continues on and on no matter what, medication doesn't seem to help, therapy doesn't seem to help, talking to them doesn't seem to help, even illegal drugs or substances or more controversial drugs like marijuana, alcohol, vodka, none of that seems to work. In fact, it feels like it's making things worse for you in that relationship or in that family. That can all lead to symptoms of complex PTSD. Again, specifically because you've got all of those things coming against you possibly, and it's in a habitual, repetitive kind of a cycle. It really does become a cycle of anger and a cycle of abuse. Now, let me also say that the rage and the anger, and the intermittent explosivity, that tends to always be disproportionate to the trigger. There may be a trigger, but the reaction is a lot smaller than the trigger. So the anger and the rage is disproportionate to the trigger. There's a lot of frightening, problematic rage episodes that are impulsive and aggressive. And we're talking about that person is not just cursing you out, because I've seen some people in sessions where they're upset. I've even seen people just in my personal life where they're upset, they're screaming, they're yelling, they're cursing, but they're not going to take this an extra step because number one, they don't want to face legal consequences. And number two, they have a little bit of self-respect. They're just upset. So we're not talking about those kind of individuals. We're talking about those Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde personalities where 1 minute they're nice and sweet and kind, and the next minute the switch is flipped and they are vulgar in their profanity use. They are threatening to hit you, kick you, bite you, spit on you. They may even try that, which is the lowest thing a person can do, but they've done it. I've seen it multiple times throughout my life, professional and personal. The person just becomes this out of control individual who doesn't have the ability to self-control. They don't have the ability to pump the brakes and say, this is not the way things should be. This is not a healthy situation. I'm mad. I'm going to walk away. I may slam some things. Just leave me alone. I'll come back to myself. People who have that kind of control over their anger are not these people that we're talking about tonight. We're talking about the explosivity that leads to trauma because it is an uncharacteristic form of that person's behavior. A clinical characterization of this kind of rage and anger is if it happens habitually or repetitively, if it happens over multiple occasions, and if it happens in a variety of isolated events, then we are no longer talking about just simple rage and anger. We are now talking about a behavioral trait. We are now talking about a possible personality pathology, that there's something going on a little deeper than just rage. So if it's more than a few isolated events, if it is perpetual and habitual, if it is consistent, doesn't have to happen every Wednesday, but it can happen every other month, twice a year, around the same time. It can happen December through March of the following year and an end, right? It can also happen at the drop of a hat one day, and it may be a huge explosion, and that huge explosion may never come back again. Isn't that interesting? Or you can have one huge explosion and a few mini explosions in this person that you are connected to, and then it stopped for a while. You know, there's many different ways that we could look at this, but keep in mind that the rage and the anger is always disproportionate to the trigger. It is problematic and impulsive as well as aggressive, right? There is no self-control. And the clinical characterization, or how we characterize it in clinical settings, is if this continues over and over and it's habitual and consistent and it's in isolated events over time, multiple, then we're talking about a behavioral characteristic or a personality disorder. So it's not going to be that easy to extinguish. It's not going to be that easy to say, you know what, we're going to go to get some therapy, maybe take some medication, and we're going to be okay. It's not going to be that easy. And that's what's so scary for families and people who are married to people like this. And, you know, even parents who have children like this. It's terrifying. Now, and I'm going to get to the chat box because I see you guys, you have so many comments. I want to make sure that I stay on top of them tonight. But let me just say that rage and anger in these kind of families or relationships, it really has a lot to do with the brain's circuitry. You may be wondering, why is this person so explosive all the time? Or why does this happen every 5 times a year? You know what I mean? Or why does this happen, 7 days out of the week? We never get a break. Well, we may want to look at the brain's circuitry. And if you think about the brain in terms of an electrical board, or like a fuse box, that's a better example. You open up a fuse box and you see all those buttons. I don't know what those things are called. I flip them every month, it feels like, in my house, but I can't remember what they're called. But it's like opening up that fuse box and you're looking at all those different buttons and you're like, okay, wait a minute. I don't want to blow the house up, so let me make sure I don't turn on the gas. Oh, wait, no, the gas is not attached to this, I want to make sure, oh, here's the light right here, but what if I do that? Oh, I tripped another breaker. And, as you're going through that in your mind, this is just an example. Think about that in terms of the person that is constantly full of rage. You look at them and you stand back and you say, did I hit a wrong button? Did I push the wrong button? Ooh, I think I said the wrong thing. Did I breathe the wrong way? Did I cough too loud? Did I say something that was offensive, right? It really is like looking at a fuse box. You're trying to figure out which buttons not to move, what to push, what not to trigger, because that you don't want to set off this alarm because there's something going wrong here. So we have to look at the brain circuitry of a person who is full of rage, because there's something known as the fronto-limbic system or region of the brain. And all that is the frontal lobes, which is behind the forehead. And the frontal lobes are engaged in impulse control, controlling your impulses, making decisions, planning, paying attention for long periods of time, some personality characteristics. But then there's also the limbic system, and that's involved in processing of emotions. That's involved in the generation of emotional responses. So our emotional responses to things, right? Our impulses originate in the limbic system. And of course, the processing of emotional memories, because we have the amygdala there. Let me see if I can give you just a brief visual, okay? I don't know about you, but I'm a little bit of a visual learner. And the way I got really good at psychology was taking what my professors, when I was in college so many years ago, taking what my professors would share and creating pictures. I would literally draw pictures so that I can understand. So that's why I give you guys visuals, okay? This is important. So I want you to see what brain regions are in control here, because I think this is part of the reason, even for most of the parents that see me, or the spouses that see me, or the families that see me, about that loved one who is just full of rage. You know, I think it's important for you to know that here's the brain regions that are in control here. So we have the limbic system, okay? And then we have the frontal lobes. And these two systems, I'm giving you a visual, so bear with me. The limbic system and the frontal lobes creates the fronto-limbic system. So it really is both regions that are interconnected. Okay, so the fronto-limbic, if I can spell, system. Okay, so here's just a visual of that. I'm not done. Okay, frontal lobes, limbic system interconnects with the limbic system and the frontal lobes. And so that creates two systems together. So consider this: making a decision when you're angry, making a decision when you're full of rage, making a decision when your ability to pay attention is off the charts. It's just bad, you know. Consider that the frontal lobes is what's helping you make those decisions, control those impulses. But then you've got the limbic system, which is emotional. And so your emotional responses may be very hard to regulate because your frontal lobes are having a hard time regulating how to make better decisions, how to control impulses. Does that make sense, guys? So these are two systems together. And so here's how it looks with the brain. Okay. Don't laugh at me, guys. Okay. So this is a bad picture of the brain. Oh, I messed that up so bad. Okay. This that's colored in is the frontal lobes. And this thingy-ma-do here that looks like one of those cheddar fish snacks. Sorry, guys, that was a bad drawing. This is the limbic system, and it's right in the middle of the brain, okay? And then, of course, the frontal lobes are in front of the brain. This is the back of the brain, just so you know, okay? So there's your visual. There's your kindergarten visual. All right, so that's what's happening in the brain for a person who is full of rage. Okay, one last thing. An inability to control anger and rage, or having that person just be so out of control, angry, is now being considered because of that brain connection I just told you about. The emotional part of the brain and the executive functioning part of the brain, the frontal lobes, those two things connect. Now there is some research because of neuroimaging, meaning there are studies putting people who have rage and intermittent explosive episodes, we're now putting them into brain scans to look at their brains to see what regions are lighting up when this person is full of rage. Is there any structural differences here between their brain and other brains? Is there something that's different in the circuitry, the brain circuitry, that can tell us something about why they are so difficult to live with? And some of these neuroimaging studies, is what we call them, is finding a correlation between smaller brain size, or smaller regions in the brain of the emotional centers, right? So smaller brain size in those who have rage and explosive episodes. Their brain tends to be a little bit smaller than those who do not have this kind of an issue. So some of the research that's out there is calling this a brain disorder, you know? So we're behind though. We need a lot more research than what we have. Okay, guys, I want to give you some common characteristics of these kind of angry people who are full of rage and hatred and anger and irritability and fierceness. So you're going to get that. I want to walk you through the diagnostic criteria for a person in your world who is full of rage, anger, just hatred, you know, and you can feel that. And then I also want to give you some insights on how this impacts you, because it impacts you in a very negative way if you've grown up under a parent like this, if you've had a sibling like this. It just takes a toll, right? All right, guys, so let me go to the chat box. The good glow. Hello and welcome to tonight's live chat. I'm glad to see you. The good glow says, Tamara, your brain drawing reminds me of the shape, the spaceship from the Jetsons. Yes. Oh, I love that so much. Thank you. I needed that smile and that laugh today. I can see that too. Yeah, I can see that. Now that you say so. Totally love you. Couples Light, hello and welcome. Good to see you in tonight's live chat. I'm going to go to the very beginning, though, but I wanted to point this out because you're on point by saying fetal and alcohol abuse also affects it. Yes, it does. Fetal and alcohol abuse also affects it. Alcohol abuse, drug abuse, prescription drug abuse, hormones. Do you have a mom like this, or an aunt, an older mother, and they're so moody, they're like a roller coaster, and one minute they're nice to you, next minute they're full of rage, intense anger. You've never seen it so much in your whole life until now. Most likely it's hormonal as well. So you're right, there's a lot of different components to this. Okay, let's go back up to the top, guys. Bear with me as I welcome everyone. Ellie Wynn, Sun Farrar, give it a think. James McDonald, Maria Santana, Kyra Knows, 14, 4K, Actually Jovial. So glad to see all of you. And MS, good to see you guys tonight. Actually Jovial, thank you so much for that. That's so kind. And I love the way you put that. Thank you for seeing us today. That is awesome. Thank you for saying that. And you're welcome. I'm always so glad to be on here with you guys. Today was a rough day. I had a whole day full of grief. From 1 o'clock to now. No, 1 o'clock to right before I got onto YouTube. All of my clients, my kids that have been with me for so long, 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, their parents, some of the adult clients I see, we just talked about grief all day, grief and loss. I don't know why it's a triggered topic this week in my life, but it is. So thank you. I needed that smile, and thank you, the good glow. I needed that laugh as well. Okay, let's keep moving, guys. Sigma, Praxis Synergy. Hello and welcome. Good to see you in tonight's live chat. Axe to Edge. Glad to see you as well, my friend. Heaven's Dog Mom. Hello and welcome. Good to see you. Sun and Sunflowers. It's good to see you as well. I love this. Thank you so much for that. The good glow. That's so sweet of you. I humbly receive that. Thank you. James McDonald says, I was brought up in a very rageful household. My parents are Scottish and Irish. Yeah. Oh, so they have very short fuses. Yes. My best friend was Scottish. God, I loved him. He was so cool. We were not, growing up, we were not like, how you could look at teenagers and you say, you know what, they're going to be husband and wife one day. No, that wasn't us. Scotty was my pal. Okay. And I couldn't deal with the female drama, growing up as a teenager. So, Scotty was my friend and I was Scotty's friend, and we hung out and we talked about things and we learned things together, and we were so close up until a certain point. And then we went our separate ways. Adult life kind of moves you on. But in his household, visiting, I used to look at his parents. They were so loud and they were so straight to the point and aggressive at times, passive aggressive. His mother was. Grandma just said whatever was on her tongue. Okay. So you would get hit with all kind of opinions and criticisms and you look bad today kind of comments. But you're right, James McDonald, just having a family and a household like that, it can be destabilizing, right? James McDonald says they have very short fuses, and you're right. I very much agree with that. Some of it is a cultural thing, right? And some of it is generational. Grandma acted that way and mom's learned it. Then mom's daughter has learned it, M&L Odell, hello and welcome to tonight's live chat. Glad to see you tonight. Axe to Edge says, oh, I was about to ask if you had security at your door. I thought you were in office. I am in office. Yes, yes, yes. I do have security who, how do we put this? So the security in my area where I'm currently at with my private practice, he drives the road. So every 15 to 20 minutes, we have law enforcement circle the parking lot, circle the roadway around the business district. So my practice is, incorporated with that business district. And so there will be times when I'm leaving out to get in my car and go home in the parking lot, and I'll see the police just hanging out in the parking lot, and I'll wave and he'll wave or she'll wave and I'll get in my car and leave. Or sometimes they will literally hang out in the parking lot and eat their lunch and do their patrolling, and they'll go home or they'll leave or finish their job somewhere else. So yeah, there is security, but not at the door. But there's tons of cameras and the list goes on. You kind of have to have that, right, Axe to Edge? Yeah. Eliza, I hope I'm saying that correctly. B, hello and welcome. Good to see you in tonight's live chat. Eliza says, still have my DSM from back in the day. More must be done. Too many cases today, sadly. Well, yeah, I agree. That DSM has shifted. I can't even think of, and I used to know the facts, I can't even think of the number. I want to say over 10 times the DSM has just been revised. It's hard to believe. My friend Shmita, hello, my friend. Good to see you tonight. Sun and Sunflower says that type of rage is so scary. Definitely looks demonic. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. MS says, oh dear, this was exactly the way my parents acted. So why do I expect my brothers to be any different? That is very true. Very true. Good point. She goes on to say, I was diagnosed with CPTSD, but I've recovered, not my bros. They're alleged alcoholics. Yeah, absolutely. There is a connection. I'm so sorry you had to deal with that MS. There's a connection between alcoholism and rage and explosivity. So even if, let's say, for example, your parents could be diagnosed with explosive disorder, intermittent explosive disorder, which you're going to see in a little bit. We'll go over it together just briefly. If they were diagnosed with that, there's a possibility that alcoholism could be down the line, because what happens is the person either reasons in their mind, this is not the way I want to be. This is not the life that I want to have. This is not my life. I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be moody. I don't want to be a roller coaster. I don't want to scare people. I don't want to lose self-control. And I'm going to tell you why sometimes they feel this way. And they become victim to their own guilt over time as well. But if you have somebody like this in your life, they internalize all the rage and anger that they have exhibited to the rest of us out here. And so now they go within, and there's self-loathing, and there's hatred, and there's guilt, and there's blame, and there's embarrassment and humiliation. And so what do you do to soothe those things? You run right to that vodka, or that, wine. And you think if you have half a bottle every night, it's okay. And so then you become an alcoholic over time, So there is some research, MS, that pulls those two things together. There's also research on survivors of family members who are chaotic and unsettled and angry. They often do go to drugs and alcohol. It's just really sad how that goes. M and L Odell says hair trigger goes off if the sun is too bright that day. That's a very angry person. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And have you seen them in such rage to where if you try to show them kindness and compassion, they don't perceive it because all they've been doing is raging, Yeah, it's very sad. Composite Z. I'm not sure I understand this. Okay. I'm just going to say welcome to tonight's live chat. I don't know what to think of this comment. I'll come back to it. It throws me for a loop just a little bit. I have to ponder that comment for a second. Miss Janine, hello and welcome. Good to see you in tonight's live chat. I love how you always tell me I will be there. I'll see you then. And you always see me then. So Love you for that. Thank you. Miss Janine says, this video sounds like so many people in my life, from family members to people I've known over the years. I've had to escape more than I care to remember. Thanks for explaining these. You're welcome. You're welcome. It's hard, isn't it, Miss Janine? It's hard to have people like this in your life. Oh, Composite Z. Okay, let me just post this on the screen. I get it now. I'm going to let people look at that. Okay. I also see Amy999. Hello and welcome. Good to see you in tonight's live chat. I'm just putting your comment up there. Okay. Wind turbine syndrome. Hello and welcome to the channel. Good to see you. Wind turbine syndrome says, grew up with angry parents. Yeah. Aren't they hard to digest? I see them in my practice all the time. Angry parents. And it's like, do not snap at your kid because you're miserable. Do not call your kid that name because you're miserable. Please don't look at her that way, because that's so demeaning, you know? And I hate putting parents in that position as a therapist. At the same time, I have to, at times, and I'm just sharing my inner thoughts with you, I have to kind of execute my position as therapist in a way that says, this is not okay. And so I advise you to either do it this way. I advise you to do it that way. I suggest you try it that way, but don't ever do this way again, because now you're going to create a scenario where you've put the child in therapy, but now you're abusing the child who's in therapy. So why are we in therapy? And so sometimes I'll say that to the parent and they'll just sit there and look like, that does make sense. Yeah, it does. You put the kid in therapy. You've agreed to go to therapy with your teenager, or you've begged your adult child to go to therapy with you, and now you're still abusing them. Why are we in therapy? And it ends up being the parent needs the most help, not the child, right? And that's a scary reality, because we therapists go through that. We're so busy looking at the kid that we forget that, wait a minute, here you are, this full adult. What are you doing wrong? And so sometimes that is the case. The parent is doing something wrong. So growing up with angry parents is traumatizing, right? Because you're constantly most likely criticized, demeaned, told to stay in a child's place, be quiet, I don't want to hear you. You're not giving a floor to express yourself, right? And any emotions that you may have had over the years with your angry parents may have been invalidated. And so there's a whole heap of issues there to work through over time. And it's just unfair, right? Okay, let's keep moving. I don't want to talk so much. Darian Cleary, I hope I'm saying that correctly. Hello and welcome. Good to see you in tonight's live chat. You're welcome, and thank you for that. I'm glad to see you in the chat. Thank you. All right, let's keep moving. All right. Thank you, my friend Shmita. Always glad to see you. Sarah K, hello and welcome. Good to see you in tonight's live chat. Sarah K says, hi, Tamara. Is it common with these individuals that the same trigger can sometimes elicit the rage, and at other times the exact same trigger will bring out nothing, sometimes even unusual calm? 100% yes. And I'm going to highlight your comment because I think it's a really well stated question. Yes and yes. So sometimes with a person who has rage and intermittent explosive episodes or tendencies, what happens with these individuals is they may wake up one day with a lot of gas in the tank. And a lot of gas in the tank means I'm ready to fight with any Jim, Joe, cat, Bob, or deer that steps somewhere in my way. I'm ready to deal with you, you know, because the gas tank is so full. Why is the gas tank so full? Could be low self-esteem, could be politics, could be a bad job, could be a broken up relationship. It could be a number of things, right? So that gas tank is full. Well, they go to bed. Maybe they drink a little wine. Maybe they drink some herbal tea. They hang out with a friend or two. They watch a good movie. They laugh and cry and they go to bed. The next day, depending on what they've done the prior day, the gas tank may be a little lower. And so nothing's going to trigger that angry response from them because the gas tank is low. Why is the gas tank low? Well, maybe it was a good night's sleep. Maybe they're not feeling as irritable. maybe there are a number of different factors, right? Including what I just mentioned. Maybe they had a good meal. Maybe they were out with a friend, so the gas tank is low. So you're not going to elicit that same level of anger that maybe you did 2 weeks ago, right? Now, if we talk about calm, sometimes calm really is explosive rage, right? It's just exhibited in a different way. Think about those people who have explosive anger, or they are very much hostile, but their hostility comes through in all the cuts up their arm, all the cuts on their leg, all the cuts on their torso. The rage comes out as choking somebody else and trying to nearly kill them, and feeling like you've gotten out all your anger after you've done that. Planning or plotting or premeditating somebody's downfall. That's a level of rage and calm. That's a level of rage that can come out as calm. I'm sure you've seen that before. Another example of rage that is perceived as calm, or that comes out as calm, is you made me mad. You hurt me. I'm resentful. And so now I'm coming after you. Just you wait, I'm coming after you. But now you got to figure out how. So I'm very calm because I have a variety of steps that I'm going to take to get you back. It's just a matter of time. That is the most dark and evil, I think, of rage and anger. That a person can look calm and be calm, but they're plotting a bunch of things, right? So that was a perfect question. I thank you for that, Sarah, because I deal with this all the time in the office. My coworkers deal with it, and it's a really challenging thing. One more comment. I don't know, Susie. Let me look at this. One more comment. We're going back to the content, guys. I'm trying to understand this from Susie. Susie Sherlock. Court didn't let me read it out loud. Maybe it'll make sense if I read it out loud. Court didn't care that I was assaulted repeatedly during lockdowns, and narc ex-lawyer flipped it to that I was the perpetrator. Isn't that so? I wasn't expecting that, Timur. Okay. I mean, it has nothing to do, at least I can't see the connection between what we're talking about, so I'm not going to answer that. If you want to put it in the comment section for me to answer later, please do. Because then I can address it there. But I want to stay on track tonight. Amy 999, you're my last one. Amy says, my father is a great actor, though he changes quickly. Yeah. Some people do change quickly. Or as I recently told one of my kids with autism, he was like, how can my mom be nice one minute and furious the next? Or how could my mom be furious at me, yelling, screaming, throwing things, hitting me with things, and then gets on the phone and talks to my cousin like nothing ever happened? And so I explained to him that either they switch like that because they're a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, or they switch like that because they have to switch like that. How do you cover something that you are embarrassed by? How do you cover guilt? Well, you switch, right? And you change up quickly so that you don't get caught. So that might be part of this as well. All right, guys, let's go to the common behaviors of a person who is like this. And this is what research has found as well. And I see it in clinical practice, that there is definitely sudden bouts of anger. Sudden bouts of anger. It's disproportionate to the trigger. There's violent behavior. There's violent verbal outbursts and abuse. There is impulse control issues. So I can't control what I'm thinking, feeling, what I want to lash out and do, right? There's humiliation. There's guilt. There's blame. There is an intense flooding of guilt sometimes. And that either turns into genuine guilt and sorrow, or it turns into more anger and rage. And so it's kind of like a double whammy in a sense. On one side of this, you explode when the trigger is disproportionate to the emotional reaction that you have. I'll turn that around. your response is disproportionate to the trigger. You blow up and get so angry that nobody can reason with you. And you're way up here like a volcano. And then you do all the harm. And an hour or two later, now you have to sit with what you've done and maybe the consequences of what you've done as well. And so those consequences then elicits more rage, because now the guilt is too much to tolerate. The embarrassment is too much to tolerate. You know, I got to stand my ground because I said some things that were wrong, but I have to stand my ground because I'm a man of my word or a woman of my word. And when I say something, I mean it. And I want people to know that I'm strong. You know, I have a client that said that to me a couple of years ago. She's like, I want people to understand when I'm mad, the truth is coming out. And when I'm mad, that's who I am. You've triggered me. But I want people to understand I don't mind being mad. You know, she was very much a prideful talker, you know. But these kind of individuals, they do the crime. You know, they do the time because they have to sit and process everything that they've said and done. They do the time, right? Because they're sitting there processing, okay? And then they become even more angry because now I've destroyed everything. And sometimes now I've literally destroyed everything because the door is off the hinges, the window is broken out, this house is a wreck, clothes are everywhere, my lighter, I can't find it, my matches, I can't find. I've torn up this whole place, you know? I had a client years ago. I'll share this with you. I had a client years ago. She was an interesting character. I've shared her with those of you who have been with me for a while. And she was an interesting client. She came in under the guise of depression. And so she sat in my very first office that I opened up the year that I finally got into private practice. And she was one of my first clients. So I was happy to take her on. I was trying to transition my job role, you know. So I was like, yes, come on in. Let's do some therapy. We're depressed. We're anxious. We're irritable. Yes. But when she got to my office, she sat down in front of me and she says to me that I have these hallucinations and I have this visual episode that happens where I see dead people. I see spirits. And she says to me, after talking to me for maybe 45 minutes, she says, and Tamara, he's right over your head. And I said to her, who's over my head? Because the door wasn't behind me. The door's in front of me and I'm up against a wall. So who is behind me? And so she's pointing and she's losing her ability to speak because now she's going into a panic attack. And she's crying and she's saying to me, he's standing there right behind you. And it was her abusive dad. It was what she called her abusive father's demon. That's what she would call him. And she stood up and she was shaking and convulsing. She had an epileptic lip. Oh my God, I can't say it. Epileptic. Ooh, now I really can't say it. She had epilepsy. So she had an episode. I'll put it that way since I can't pronounce it tonight. And I remember calling the police and the ambulance and getting another business to come down and help me manage her because during that episode, the convulsions started and stopped. And then she stood up, but she's still trembling and shaking. And the first thing she reached for in my office was a series of hardback heavy books that I had on my desk, like this kind of heavy book, okay? But they were thick and big, and she chucked that across the room. And she was tearing things down and running through my office and trying to snatch things apart and trying to disrupt the plants that I had. She snatched one of my plants apart. And when she came to herself later on the gurney in the ambulance, she looked at me and said, what did I do? And I said, you have completely disrupted my office, but thank God you're okay. And she says to me, I don't know what happens. I go into these violent periods of rage. I lose touch with reality. I see my father, who was very abusive to me, and then I go into these bouts. My entire home is just torn to shreds because I have episodes every single day. And, you know, there was something very eerie about her. You know, I have to say, I found therapy very unpleasant with her because there was something really going on at the core of this, and it almost felt spiritual and very, very psychological. But she was a prime example of what this kind of rage and anger looks like. And sometimes the person loses that kind of face that they have on. It's like their face is totally washed over by a different pair of eyes, by a different, you know, holding of the facial muscles. They don't look like the same person. And so she had intense and immense guilt after these rages, you know, and there was a lot of property damage. And this is what you're likely to see as well. There was, you know, a lot of difficulty working through the process of what her rage would take her through. You know, it's embarrassing, it's humiliating, it's shocking. So what made her different, though, and I'm going to bring this up, the DSM, because I want you to know what the clinical criteria is before we go to how this impacts you. And then I'm going to check the chat box. We'll wrap up. But she ended up being diagnosed with epilepsy. She ended up being diagnosed with major depressive disorder. It was a single episode where she wanted to take her own life. So she had moderate depression, single episode that was major in her life. And then what I added to her diagnosis was what we call a rule out, meaning we're just putting this here because we think there may be something going on here. So it's called a rule out of intermittent explosive disorder. So intermittent explosive disorder is this. It is a failure to control aggressive impulses that's recurrent. That's one. Underneath that category of recurrent, aggressive, impulsive, angry, rageful behaviors, you have verbal aggression. We're reading from this. I should have told you. I think I told you, but just in case I didn't. Verbal aggression, physical aggression, occurring twice weekly on average for a period of 3 months. So there has to be this consistency. The other issue is it's involving damage or destruction of property and or physical assault. And it could be physical injury to humans. It could be physical injury to animals, right? Which we talked about at the beginning of the week, which was about the dangerous nature or the capacity of high-risk dogs. We talked about that this week. I think it was Tuesday. Yeah, Tuesday. So sometimes with these individuals who have intermittent explosive disorder, there is animal destruction or animal abuse. There is also human abuse, right? So they find somebody, in a sense, to harm. You know, it's almost like their rage is so intense, they turn to something, whether that's an animal or a human being. The second one is the magnitude of aggressiveness that is expressed during the outburst is grossly disproportionate to the trigger. So it's out of proportion to the trigger, and to any precipitating event. So sometimes the anger may have nothing to do with what happened a couple minutes before they blew up in anger. You know, it's like, okay, you're angry, but there was nothing really to trigger you like that. And there was also nothing that happened that should have caused this huge breakdown where we have to call the police and have you handcuffed and detained because you're so out of control, right? So, you know, there's this response that's disproportionate to the trigger. There's really not a precipitating event that should cause such an intense reaction. There's also recurrent aggressive outburst that's caused by distress in the individual. So remember, I said there's blame, there's guilt, there's shame, there's humiliation. And in addition to that, the chronological age has to be at least 6 years old, right? So between ages 6 to 18 and above into adulthood, nothing under the age of 6 can be categorized as intermittent explosive disorder. And the diagnosis can accompany 3 to 4 different diagnoses. And I'm going to show that to you in 1 second here because I'm going to write it down. You guys know this. I talk about it all the time. It's the road to sociopathy. So the DSM says intermittent explosive disorder can I do this? Yeah, I can do this. Okay. So intermittent explosive disorder can then lead to sometimes ADHD, or it can be diagnosed along with ADHD or ADD. It can also be diagnosed with ODD, oppositional defiant disorder. It can also be diagnosed with conduct disorder. And it can also be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. So here's how this looks. See, intermittent explosive disorder, IED, can also be connected to ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, and antisocial personality disorder. Imagine dealing with that in your household. Imagine dealing with that with a spouse. He not only has attention deficit disorder, but he also has intermittent explosive disorder. He is explosive and the whole house shakes. Or think about a mother or a father who has a son who's 10 years old. He has intermittent explosive disorder. He just snaps all the time. Drop of the dime, drop of a hat, a splitting of a hair. He's ready to scream, have a tantrum, threaten to kill people. The list goes on. But in addition to that, he also has oppositional defiant disorder. So he's also oppositional. So it's kind of like up to we clinicians, to be honest, to tease those things apart. Here's what intermittent explosive disorder is doing to the person. But here's what ADHD is doing, and ADD, and antisocial personality disorder. And sometimes the person is diagnosed with both antisocial personality disorder and intermittent explosive disorder because no clinician can figure out which disorder is taking the upper hand here. What is the bigger issue, So sometimes diagnoses can be really complicated, but they go together, guys. And you may be asking, why do they go together? Well, consider the link between executive functioning and ADD, poor behavior management, personality, poor control of attitude and emotional responses. So it kind of all interconnects, right? So let me jump into how this impacts you, and I'll go to the chat box and then we will wrap up. How does this impact you? Growing up with somebody like this, living in a household with a sibling like this, having a spouse, a parent, having, somebody in your space, even at work, who blows up. You can sense it on the inside. They're ready to explode, right? So how does that impact you? Well, first, research in psychology suggests, and I've seen this as well in clinical settings, that there is an erosion of trust over time. Erosion of trust over time. How can you continue to hold on to somebody and trust them and rely on them and love them and care for them and want to protect them and make them happy when all they're doing is stepping on your fingers? So what do you have to do? You got to let go, right? And so over time, depending on how many rage episodes this person has on you or around you, it starts to weigh you down. And so you may get depressed. You may come out with complex PTSD. You may, start really becoming angry yourself, and you notice it because you're snippy or you're snappy, right? Or you're irritable. You're not getting enough sleep. You're feeling really angry with life. That other person, little by little, the more they step on your fingers, the more they disregard you. Trust is just eroding, right? It's going out the door. So trust erosion is really what this is called. There's also a grief and loss process here. A grief and loss process. It can be very grievous to look at that person that you love and care about who's snapping at you. Or maybe you are grieving the relationship you wish you had because they're yelling at you. They're snapping at you. They're spreading rumors. They're saying things about you behind your back. They're triangulating within the family or relationship. They're bringing other people and getting them involved in this, which is blowing things up and making it harder to talk to them and live with them, right? So there's a grief and a loss process to this. There's also a cycle of abuse, that continues over and over and over with this person. And while they may have guilt, they may feel blame, they may feel shame, they may want to change their anger outbursts. That doesn't change the fact that you are being abused. So there's a cycle of abuse that happens. And these kind of people will often say, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to get so upset. It was just a bad day. I smoked too much marijuana. I drank alcohol. I think I was drunk. I don't mean to do this to you. I really love and care about you. And they'll do that over and over and over and over again because they have a true problem. And it's a problem with emotion regulation. It's a problem with neurological capacity. Remember, the brain circuitry is off. It's just miswired, if you will. And there's also pride wrapped in there. It's embarrassing when you get so out of control, when you're so angry, So there's a lot wrapped in that. And so the cycle of abuse just continues because that person is not where they should be. You know what I mean? There's also a significant history of people. So you, for example, of getting into multiple relationships that fail over time, because number one, you most likely have developed a sensitivity to being yelled at and cursed out and screamed at and pushed and manipulated and bullied, right? So that causes your own failure in relationships because maybe you can't deal with your spouse. Maybe your spouse is just like your father or your mother and you can't manage that, right? So you may have a history of failed relationships. There's also this breakdown of communication that happens, a breakdown in communication. How can you pick up the phone and call someone who yells, screams, explodes within seconds or less than, 10 minutes? They're in a rage. They're in a tizzy, as my grandmother used to say. It's destabilizing. And so what happens? You stop communicating. Nope, I'm not answering your texts. Nope, I'm not answering your phone calls. You're not coming to my house. This is the boundary because you can't deal with it. So there's a breakdown in communication. When there's a breakdown in communication because of anger, then the relationship between you two also breaks down. So it's not just the communication, it's also the emotional intimacy in that relationship that breaks down. Emotional intimacy between a parent and their child, adult child, teenager, young child, that's special. I can tell my mom that my heart hurts today. I can tell my dad that I feel like I'm failing life. That kind of close intimacy is derailed in a relationship where there's intermittent explosive disorder because you don't know what's going to happen if you say the wrong thing at the wrong time. You don't know what that other person's going to do to you for sharing how you feel. So a lot of people just say, you know what? I don't want to deal with this. No emotional intimacy. We'll laugh. We'll talk about life. We'll do things that we equally like, but there's no relationship here. It's hard to have a relationship with them. You may also feel emotionally drained and completely worn out. Emotionally drained and completely worn out. And that is because rage and anger, it kind of sometimes has a slow ride, and it rises and it rises and it rises until there's a huge volcanic explosion. And because of that, you may find yourself standing on the sidelines trying to figure out which way to go. And you've got to deal with this person screaming and profanity and slamming things and threatening and intimidation and bullying and manipulation and right. And so there you are standing there with all this wreckage from the volcano. And it's really hard to feel any kind of energy because you are simply exhausted. And that is to be expected with these people. This is an interesting topic, right, guys? I come back tomorrow. We're going to talk about more in this area. We're going to go a little bit deeper into this topic. I really just touched the surface with this one. But we're going to talk about personality pathology again tomorrow and behavioral traits will come back. This is quite overwhelming, and it's overwhelming for me even when I'm in a therapeutic role. If it happens in my family, I can kind of navigate that a little bit better, but with a client, it's really difficult. With a husband, it's difficult. A wife, it's difficult. A family member, because you don't know how to walk those eggshells in a way that keeps you from literally, smashing them in half, right? Because it's hard to walk on eggshells. And it's even harder to walk on eggshells when any single thing can lead to an explosion, right? All right, let me go to the chat box. John Tracy, hello and welcome. Good to see you tonight. John says it's to bring you back under control. Yeah, sometimes their behavior is to bring you back under control. 100%. Absolutely. Okay, let me keep moving. Maria Santana, I know I'm way up in the comments, so bear with me, guys. Maria Santana says, the longer you bury deep emotions without processing them, the worse it is. It is important to deal with trauma as soon as possible. Otherwise, it becomes a pressure cooker. I do believe that. Thank you so much for saying that. I definitely am going to highlight that in the chat box. MS said the fuse box is an excellent analogy. Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. Absolutely. James McDonald says people with rage can suddenly switch from mild manner to an exploration. Yeah. Yeah. Or they can go from suddenly switch from mild mannered to explosive, right? Yeah. Yeah. Composite Z says, what part of the brain is responsible for ruminating? That's really good. I'm glad you asked that question. So I think there's a variety of overlapping brain structures. What's interesting about rumination is it's constant thinking about the same thing over and over and over, right? And you just get tired of your own thoughts. That most likely parts originate in the frontal lobes because there's reasoning, processing, planning, decision-making, right? And rationalization. So that's all the prefrontal cortex behind the forehead. But then it's also interconnected to the hippocampus, who kind of cements memories, right? It's connected to the amygdala. That's an emotional system that cements our emotional memories. You remember that popcorn smell in grandma's house when you were 5, So there's a variety of brain regions. There's both cognitive and emotional brain regions that come together, composite Z, and contributes to rumination. So we may get to that at some point if you guys want me to break that down and talk about it. Couples Light says, our fathers can't give us what they never given to them. Let me go over this. Our fathers can't give us what they never were given. I'm going to put it that way because I think that's what you meant. And I very much agree with that. You can't give what you don't have. Very, very much agree with that. MS, so glad you love the visuals. Thank you for that. Good to hear. Good to hear. Sun and Sunflower says they definitely know what they are doing with these races. A lot of them refuse to get help. Absolutely. You mean rages. 100%. Here you are. You corrected it. Yes, I very much agree. Sometimes they are very much aware of what they do. Sometimes, and this is just my clinical perspective. Okay, this is not research. But I always feel like sometimes there's those people they have intermittent explosive disorder, but there's subcategories underneath, and it's like, this is intermittent explosive disorder plus narcissism. Okay, so that's one subcategory in my own clinical mind. This is what I see. Intermittent explosive disorder with the sociopath. Intermittent explosive disorder, but they kind of like it because it gets them what they want sometimes. You stomp a few times, slam a few doors, threaten to sue, boom. You have your free dinner and bottle of wine. So I think there are subcategories of people under the surface, Excuse me. So I very, very much agree with that. Excuse me, guys. Okay. Ooh. Let me put this over here before I create an explosion. Jessica J, hello and welcome. Glad to see you. And you're welcome. I hope your technical issues get worked out. I hate that, don't you? It's like it just stops you. It slows you down. But it's so good to see you. All right, let me keep moving. Good Vibes 30, hello and welcome. It has been a long time. Good to see you. Welcome. Okay, let me keep moving. I'm way behind. Nancy, good to see you. Welcome. And good to see you as well. Akon, hello and welcome. I hope I said that right. Keith B, good to see you as well. I'm always glad when you can show up, when all of you guys can join us. That's awesome. Call me a CP. Hello and welcome. Good to see you. And thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I really try. I do. Right? We don't have time. We don't have time on this planet to be talking about lies. Thank you, TruthWorks 101. Hello and welcome. Good to have you. Hopefully you've hit that subscribe button and you've become a subscriber. I saw you say that you came up in my algorithm. The algorithm kind of reads your mind sometimes, right? I know it does for me. Good to see you. Sammy, hello and welcome. I'm doing good today. How are you? I haven't seen you in so long. Hope you're doing well. Okay, let me keep moving. TruthWorks 101 says, wow, I think it's hitting home for you. Yeah. Leslie A, hello and welcome. Good to see you in tonight's live chat. Fairy Girl, always glad to see you with the jabs. Good to see you. All right, let me keep going. I got to find some comments here before we get ready to sign off. Oh, that's awesome. I'm going to start a comment. TruthWorks 101 says, God must have led me to your channel stream. God bless you. Thank you. And amen. I would take that as like meat and food and fuel, that maybe that was a leading from God, you know, to just, I'm going to click on this and see what she's doing. You know, you never know. I do believe that those things kind of happen, right? Things kind of align, you know, and you know, on the inside, they're aligned, you know, I've been there. I love when that happens. Okay, let me keep moving. Jasmina, hello and welcome. Good to see you tonight. Jasmina says, experience this as a kid. At 13, a caseworker called out my mom. Awkward. Yeah, I'm sure. Woo, I'm sure. Yeah, that is awkward. And probably destabilizing in some ways, you know. Darian Cleary. Oh my goodness, I call you the wrong thing. I'm sorry. You're welcome. So glad it's helpful to you. Jeremy Robinson, I haven't seen you in a little while. Hello and welcome. Good to see you. Jeremy asks, can someone with explosive personality disorder or intermittent explosive disorder also use drugs like cigarettes to cope with their anger? 100%. Most research on nicotine addiction shows that there is a correlation between anger, rage, schizophrenia, depression, and even some anxiety disorders and using cigarettes or nicotine or vaping. So 100%. Yes, yes, yes. I won't get too deep into that research, but yes, that's my short answer. Jay Nash, hello and welcome. Good to see you in tonight's live chat. It's been a little while. Jay Nash says instrumental rage. Never experienced it until I moved in with a family member. Yep. You guys know what instrumental rage is. It's using rage and anger to intimidate, get a job done the way you want it to get done, right? The rage is so overpowering, and that person allows it to get so overpowering that they become their own weapon to everybody on the outside of them, you know? So yes. Fairy Girl says, we were never responsible for their emotional regulation. Sadly, what choice did we have? I very much agree with that. I'm going to star that. I agree. Yep. Very good. Very well said. Very good and very well said, Fairy Girl. Priya Mason, hello and welcome. Good to see you. We're going to sign off here in just a little bit. I'm behind in the comments, but I want to at least get most of you. Elena Lorino, hello and welcome. Good to see you in tonight's live chat, and welcome to the channel. I don't remember seeing you. You say, my brother was viciously, seethingly vindictive. He admitted to spreading rumors and sabotaging social plans. Yeah, that is a mess. Absolutely. I've seen people like that. I've seen them with that kind of mindset and disposition, and it is just despicable. It's like, when I'm angry, the entire world better watch out. We all get angry, right? I get angry. Sometimes my anger is righteous indignation, meaning that I get angry at things that I don't like. I don't like liars. I don't like infidels. I'm not okay with people who have affairs. That pushes a button on me. and I can't work with them because it pushes a button on me. It's really hard for me to work with alcoholics because of family who engaged in that behavior. My late grandmother, who we loved dearly, before she became an older saved woman, she was a young married alcoholic. And according to my uncle and my mom, she caused a lot of trauma. And it's awful. My late grandmother's father was an alcoholic. So it's like, once you see the pictures, you see the history, you see what your family line has been, you look at that and you say, oh my God, I can't stand this thing that's a liquid prison for people, you know? So I have a hard time working with people who are addicted to alcohol, people who are addicted to drugs, that kind of thing. Nothing personal. It's just, it's so hard to digest when a person is drunk, high, mean, vicious, vindictive, controlling. The list just goes on. You know what I mean? So it's hard for me to digest trying to work with people who are like your brother. That was my main point, Elena. And hopefully I'm saying your name correctly. But it's hard to deal with people like that. It's so selfish. We all get angry. And like I said, some of us have righteous indignation, and it comes out as ferocious anger because you don't like something. But a person who is manipulative, controlling, and trying to put fear in other people to manipulate them, that is a problem. That is a problem. Dr. Right Life, I'm going to put your comment up on the screen for people to see. Hello and welcome. It's always good to see you in a live chat. You kind of back up what I say in my live chats, I've noticed, so it's always good to see you. Is it Xerox? Xerox, I hope that's correct. Hello and welcome. Good to see you. I'm going to put your comment up there so people can see it. I'm just running through things to make sure that I can get most of you tonight. Chief Handler deletes targets. I'm just going to say welcome to the chat tonight. Women can be emotional, yes, but we are not all acting this way unless you push a button, and then that's a whole other story, you know? 150 Writer, hello and welcome. Good to see you in tonight's live chat. Welcome to the channel. I'm going to put your comment up there. You say, sounds like the old man down the street, triggers easily, a real rageaholic. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. You have to ask yourself, when somebody is triggered like that, and they're like a horse out of a barn, you know, and they're just attacking things and yelling and screaming and cursing. And just, you really do have to ask yourself, what went wrong here? Is there drugs here? Excuse me. Is there alcohol here? Is there depression? And this is how they get it under control. They rage. Is it jealousy and envy? What is happening here? So you must definitely want to ask yourself, with a person like this, what's triggering you? What's happening here? Okay, guys. Okay, I'm going to delete your comment because you're being rude. This was Chief Chandler, whatever his name was. He's being rude, or she, whoever it was in gender. But I'm deleting their comments. Sorry, guys. Sorry, guys. In case you were wondering, when is Chandler going to get rid of this person? Couples light. I agree with this. Through Christianity, generational curses also affect behavior. Agree. Raymond Vincent Garcia, haven't seen you in a while, my friend. Hope you guys are doing well. Raymond Vincent Garcia says, I can relate. Yes, true, Tamara. Their face does change. The face looks completely different. Yeah. It's like a different soul is taking over, you know. A and B, hello and welcome. Good to see you. Hope you're doing okay. All right, one more, I think. Danita Minor, hello and welcome. So glad you can make it tonight. Always glad to see you. Fairy girl, love you with the dabs. I'm going to star your comment there. Okay. Okay, where are we? I'm so sorry, guys. I'm so distractible. Akon says, Tamara, there was no shame or guilt when my parents went into their rage attacks, anything of me mentioning a future for myself or independence would make them flip into monsters. Wow. Whew. Well, here's what you want to consider. Was this intermittent explosive disorder? Was this really rage, or was this bipolar disorder? Was this borderline personality disorder where emotion regulation is not even in the puzzle? Right? Because everybody with borderline personality disorder is different. You have to figure out what's the combination lock for this person with borderline personality disorder. And if you think about borderline personality as being the umbrella, think about all the subcategories under the bottom of borderline. So we're talking about an angry borderline personality. We're talking about a raging borderline personality, irritable and, very hard to entreat and get to know and deal with. You might also be seeing under that umbrella category of borderline personality, somebody who's very afraid of abandonment, who's manipulative, who cuts and threatens suicide all the time, who has rocky relationships. They never have stable relationships because their anger is so big and it's so disproportionate to the trigger. So you do want to ask yourself, am I really dealing with rage here? Or am I dealing with borderline personality? Am I dealing with a narcissistic injury where the person hates hearing that somebody else's life is going to go this way, or somebody has offended them, and now they're like in this complete explosion because they can't stand to hear that somebody else can be something in life, right? So that could be a narcissistic injury, right? So it's like figuring out, where does this person belong? And so if you find that there doesn't seem to be any guilt or blame on their part, then you might be dealing with a personality disorder and not just anger, rage, and intermittent explosive disorder. Actually, Jovio says, I definitely have to rewatch this. Very good information. Thank you so much for that. That literally helps the channel. So thank you for that. That's why we are the fastest growing channel on YouTube that goes live every single Friday, every single Saturday, that talks about these specific topics, guys. So we continue to be the #1 channel on YouTube that goes live every weekend. So thank you for rewatching. That really does help the channel as well. Sun Farrar says, I can imagine all of that in a partner. It's exhausting. Yes, it is. Leslie A says, we should, as a society, try our best to encourage each other. Not, did you finish that? I'm going to leave it at that. So we're going to say we should do our best to encourage each other. I very much agree with that. I agree with that. Cecilia Shire, I hope I said that correctly, says, hello and welcome, by the way, to the chat and to the channel. Cecilia says, and when this is apparent, can't this lead to projection and sadly scapegoating of a child in the family? Yes, it can. You're the black sheep. You're the problem. You need therapy. You're the identified patient. You're the one who's making me mad. There are parents who are so immature. They will say things such as, you're the one who made me mad. You're the one who caused this fight. You're the one who's doing this, not me. And it's such an ugly thing. You know what I mean? But they will do it. Yes. And projection. Yes. I have all this anger on the inside, but I'm projecting it onto my child. And my child goes to school and comes back home and told me they were in school detention for being in a food fight. And here I am projecting my anger onto him. And I'm telling him that all he does is walk around mean. I'm judging him and I'm criticizing him. And I'm telling him he needs to get off of this kick of being so angry with everybody. All the while, that parent is talking to themselves, right? Absolutely. Okay, guys, I want one more comment and then we're going to go. Can you see I try to get all of you? I do. This is so hard because there's a lot of you on here, and I'm so glad when you all can be on here and that you don't hold that against me that I can't get to all of you. I really do try. Patrick Black 01, that's okay. Hello and welcome. It's good to see you in the live chat tonight. I'm going to look for one more person. I lied. Tammy Nicely, hello and welcome. Hope you are doing well. Always glad when you can sign in as well. Good to see you. And Layla Papa, you're my last one. Hello and welcome. Good to see you. I definitely will see you guys tomorrow. Come join me tomorrow. We'll talk more about this. I'm going to post some information in the community section on my channel that, how am I going to say this? That is going to highlight what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. But tell me if you would like me. I'm pondering it. Tell me if you would like me to activate a new system on my channel that creators have now gotten. It is called viewer community posts. And I'm not sure I want to do that on a channel where we talk about such intense things, but let me know if you want to try it out, because here's what it is. I will activate it to where all of you who are members and subscribers, you will have access to my community section page on my channel. And you can post thoughts about psychology. You can post issues that happen to you throughout the week that you want to share that has something to do with what I'm going to be talking about on the channel that week. You can post some things that you would like another subscriber or another member on the channel to consider. You can also create and add to a community where you guys can communicate without me, and I will chime in throughout the week. So, let me know if you want me to consider strongly activating that on the channel, because I most certainly will. I know you guys have cool stuff you're probably reading throughout the week or looking at or watching movies you're watching, and maybe you want to share that. And so you can go to my community section and share that, hit the post button, and everybody has access to it, considering me. Oh my God. As well as me, not considering me, but as well as me. So let me know if you want to try that. I'm strongly thinking about it. And then I'm also kind of opposed. So I don't know where I am on this, but let me know. Guys, I love you. I hope you have a wonderful Friday, a safe Friday. Hope to see you tomorrow. Good night, guys.